So in that sense, that was very important. And we had the corruption issues also coming out. But of course, and I think that's a difference with Egypt, the human rights issue was much more important than the other issues. So what we did was to emphasize human rights on the corruption issues, mostly the selling of state companies to private groups in a very obscure manner that nobody knows how they bought and what price they got. So we brought that to the Congress. The Congress created the commission to do the investigation, and all the material they gathered went to the judiciary. And we follow up. But we decided that the most important thing to us was to establish a system that will avoid corruption in the future. So we moved very strongly in that direction. That was our priority in terms of improving control, establishing new laws of transparency. All things will be with public biddings, the strengthening of the Comptroller General. Congress will start working with the commissions to do investigations, and strengthening the regulatory system in every area, opening the press, and the press helps a lot to clarify those issues, and we declared zero tolerance against these things. So it's very important that the political body reacts very strongly when you have those things. Now, on politics and economics, and just to end, you cannot satisfy all demands at once. You have to choose, and as I've said, what is important is to enhance public order. And I see here in Egypt the issue of tourism as being a very central aspect linked to public order, and also to enhance private investment and private sector. So in that sense, we also moved to reduce the number of non-essential companies in the hands of the state. And at the same time, instead of having the ownership of those companies, strategic companies like copper or oil or, well, it's completely different. But if you have a bakery or you have a textile company, well, it's better that you have a good regulatory system, a good transparent system, rather than having that in the hands of the government, because the government will have to develop new instruments for social policies, for development, so research and development, innovation. So it's better to improve regulations than to have the ownership. That was our policy. And finally, let me say that democracy has lots of resilience, and democracy resists crisis. Today, when you see the history of Latin America, you will see that we had very large economic crisis, lots of debts, inflation, and democracy resisted that. People value democracy in terms of their dignity and their freedom, and if they feel that the government is doing what is the most in the direction of what I mentioned, growth and equity, they will support that. And let me end with this. The most difficult issue comes for the first transition government. The first months of transition are very important because you signal the road ahead. So it's very important for us, it was very important, to build a coalition that will win a majority in Congress and will support the new government and the new president in order to allow that government to move ahead. If the government is alone, well, we tried very much to avoid candidates for the presidency by alone, to try to stop ego, and try to build coalitions instead of ego. And therefore, we had primaries, and we selected one candidate for the presidency, and we won the 4 presidents in a row, 20 years. And that allowed us to face better all those things. And I think that for that coalition, it's very important, and I want to reemphasize what President Bachelet of my country said yesterday, women must be, from the very beginning, involved in Congress and politics. You don't have a democracy without more presence of women. And second, young people. We probably made a mistake. Young people became more apathy increased within the young people. They start voting less and participating less. And if you have a big capital in terms of young people, my experience is that these people are involved in government from the very beginning. You are creating a new generations of leaders for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. أعتقد أن أنا كنت أسمع قصة مصر في كل التحولات التي ذكرها. يعني لا شك أن احنا نستفيد من التجربة، لأن ده بيؤكد أن يمكن الخطوط اللي احنا ماشيين عليها في مصر دلوقتي واخدة الاتجاه الصحيح. أعتقد أن هناك كثير من ما ذكره الزميل يعني مصر كانت بدأت فيه وفعلا بتحاول أنها تستمر في نفس الخط الخاص بالإصلاح. والآن نحن مع شخصية من أفريقيا His Excellency Maharaj. I'm sorry for if I make a mistake into the name.
No problem. You're pronouncing it better than I can.
Oh, well. I should go then to South Africa. He's senior ANC negotiator and first Minister of Transport in post-apartheid era. Mr. Mac was appointed Special Envoy of the President of South Africa, His Excellency Jacob Zuma, in November 2009. Maharaj was a founding member of the South African Freedom Association and succeeded Solly Sachs as its secretary, as well as a founding member of the anti-apartheid movement in exile in July. كلهم كانوا راحوا الإكسايل، يعني لازم يحصل نوع من التعذيب يعني شوية كده في السكة يعني. بس دي بتدي قوة على كل حال يعني. بدليل إنهم قاعدين معانا النهاردة. Was appointed Secretary of the Internal Political and Reconstruction Department of the ANC in December 1977. This department was mandated to create and maintain the underground ANC within South Africa and to supervise the mass mobilization of the people within the country. He served on the Revolutionary Council and its successor, the Politisio Military Council of the ANC, since 1979. He was first elected to the National Executive Committee of the ANC in 1985 and was re-elected in 1991, 1994, and 1997. He was Joint Secretary with Fanny van Mermerwe of the Transnational Executive Council, which oversaw South Africa's transition to democracy after South Africa's first democratic election in April 1994. He was appointed Minister of Transport. أنا مش عارف حكاية المينستر اوف ترانسبورت الأولاني والثاني. وزير النقل بتاعنا يشد حيله شوية. In addition to his work at Carnegie, Saif serves as a consultant to, I'm sorry. He was appointed Minister of Transport in the government led by President Nelson Mandela. I greet Mr. Mandela in this occasion. He has done a wonderful job in South Africa. And South Africa is a very good example, and I think we should follow some of your steps. I think one of the committees now, which is formed for a national dialogue, is taking the experiment of South Africa as an example. He retired from Parliament in 1999 election. He obtained a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Natal and a Business Administration from the University of South Africa. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Since you mentioned former President Mandela, I must say I don't share your admiration for him, because all my life, whenever I got into trouble, it's because he asked me to do something. It's also a fact that when we came into government in 1994, we did not realize just how bankrupt the state was. And when President Mandela made me Minister of Transport, I realized after a few months that in fact the portfolio should have been called Minister Without Transport. But be that as it may, colleagues, sharing an experience of macroeconomic transformation, the challenges of that, as well as the issues of reducing the disparities that exist in our society, is an enormous challenge. I think if you put two economists in a room and ask them for their opinion, you'll get 3 opinions.
If you have 100 or so?
And usually all 3 opinions, when used, will give you different results. But of course we need economists, and I can say that because I'm not an economist. I think we need to start by saying that what I said yesterday, we live in one world. It is impossible anymore for any country to see itself as an island on its own. And that applies to its economy, that applies to its politics, that applies to its human rights, that applies to all the freedoms we enjoy. We are part of one world. We can't walk away from it. And that world is organized against the developing world. It's not in favor of the developing world. So that's a big challenge in itself. It's also a world that is unstable. And we can talk about many reasons why that world is unstable. But one of those is that it is a world where our productive capacity has risen to such a level that there actually should not be any poverty whatsoever. And yet, there is so much poverty in this world that it is the source of instability. If we are part of one world, you are going to be part of that world, and you're going to be faced with joining hands with other countries in facing that challenge of changing this world order so that the relations in the global economy follow rules that reflect the challenges of today, not the power relations of yesterday. And fortunately, the changing in that world should not leave us despondent. You can see it today where the IMF has to appoint a new chief executive. The done deal of the developed world is no longer acceptable to the rest of the world. And so there is a challenge to that as to who gets appointed. But in that challenge, it mirrors also our weakness as a developing world. We have challenged the IMF to say it cannot be that only a person from the developed world becomes the head of that body. And we have thousands of most competent, highly trained, highly experienced people in the developing world to fulfill that post. But we as a developing world can't agree who should be fulfilling that post. So I point these colleagues to the weaknesses, strengths, the contradictions that exist in the world of which we are part. And Egypt has been part of it, has played a magnificent role. It was a founder of the non-aligned movement at Bandung. It has been associated with Afro-Asian solidarity. But we have to acknowledge to ourselves that as a non-aligned movement, we were caught in a superpower world, and we learned how to exploit the gaps between those superpowers, but we never learned how to change the world. So now we have to learn how to change the world. What about the country we live in? Well, I think it's a truism, every country is as different as the other. In South Africa, maybe we faced an extremely formidable challenge. Our entire system was skewed by race. A small minority, a community called the white people, who traced their origins to Europe, controlled everything to their advantage and benefit, while the overwhelming majority people of color sat at the bottom end of society. Even the jobs you did were determined by the color of your skin. The wages you received, sometimes for the same job, determined by the color of your skin. Even your dreams of the future were confined by the color of your skin. That dysfunctionality was also characterized by a closed economy, a completely protected economy from the rest of the world, sealed off. And part of that closed economy was due to the campaign that we had waged around the world to isolate apartheid South Africa. So to break that isolation, apartheid South Africa, had to develop ways to beat the arms embargo, to beat the oil embargo, to find ways to trade clandestinely. But in that economy, the private sector was overwhelmingly invested with monopolistic tendencies. Partly the objective conditions, because those large conglomerates in the private sector generating phenomenal profits could not invest it outside South Africa. So they had to invest it inside South Africa and develop into huge monopolies. But side by side with that, the state sector was extremely powerful. In the transport sector, state-owned enterprises were responsible for 60% of the services. And they were a bloated bureaucracy, creating no efficiencies in that economy. Unemployment was sitting at above 25% and was structural. There was skills shortage. We had a bloated civil service. We had a mismanaged economy, and we had endemic corruption. Our country was controlled by a state security sector. I can go on listing its skewedness and dysfunctionality. But as I do so, I think what I'm trying to do is to give you an idea, just a bird's eye view of the type of challenges we were facing. Our economy was urban-based, whereas at that time the majority of our people, black people, were living in the rural areas. Since then, things are changing, but they are changing at such a rapid pace that shanty towns, squatter camps, simply litter the peripheries of our cities. And our program to build housing is simply unable to catch up with that flow. The challenge of the economists who have told us all the stories, at one time structural reform through the IMF and World Bank, other time you must privatize, other time you must have public investment. None of those things were working, and let's be clear, colleagues, we live in a world where with all the best minds and the largest private sectors and the huge tax base, no country today in this world is able to get growth going with adequate job creation. Job creation, jobless growth has become a feature of economies throughout the world. Okay? So we're trying to solve problems in our country where there is no world experience telling us how to solve it. Now you must understand again, obviously we will have made and will be making huge mistakes. And we live in a world where one mistake can almost be catastrophic. I give you an example. There was a period after Mandela where our president turned out to be, for shorthand, an AIDS denialist. And the result of that neglect of addressing the problem of the AIDS pandemic has meant that when in '94 we became a democracy and the lifespan of a person on average was 57 years, it has dropped to 45 today. And can you imagine the catastrophic influence that has on the economy? One mistake. So this is the type of world you're coming into today in moving into a democracy in Egypt. And I make this difference not because what you have done in the past is necessarily wrong or right. The point is you're now entering into a democracy where previously you could blame the dictator. Now you have to blame yourself if you get it wrong. But that's a wonderful thing, colleagues. It's wonderful because it means you're in charge of your life. We inherited an economy and a socio-economic system where, because of race criteria, each community was being divided on tribal lines. And the result is that for education alone, we had 14 education departments. Chile had one. Egypt's got one national education department. We had 14 national education departments with 14 directors generals. And we had to combine these now, deracialize them, but what to do with the other 13 director generals? So even if we had to do anything, we had to negotiate in our transition to guarantee the civil service their jobs for at least 5 years into the future. So we had to pick up the bill of 13 other director generals, even though there were no jobs for them. So if I put it jokingly, as a Minister of Transport, I could take one director general and make him my driver, but pay him the salary of a director general. Our cities were dysfunctional. You come to South Africa, you need to look, because it's a country where the first world and the third world coexist. And you can live in that first world and think, what a glorious country, and not be aware of the other side of the world. But race rule had determined that black people, who were the workers, should live furthest away, should live out of sight. That meant, in my job as portfolio of transport, there was a community living 150 kilometers away from their workplace. And that meant that each of them had to go to work every morning by bus, leaving home at 3 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning, and returning home at 10 o'clock at night. Can you imagine what that meant to the productivity? You had to subsidize the bus. And when I became minister, I quietly drove over to that area and jumped onto the bus at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I started talking to the people in the bus, asking them where they work, where they earn. And I said to them, oof, you travel a huge distance in so many hours. How do you afford this bus fare? They said, oh, the bus fare is not bad. So I said, are you aware that the government is subsidizing this ticket? He said, I'm not. Who says they're subsidizing? I buy the ticket quite cheap, but the government was subsidizing each ticket. Okay? So it's a totally dysfunctional system where everything has been organized the wrong way. Now, I'm not going to tell you a good luck story. I think my country has done phenomenal things in the 17 years. But I'm here to tell you that when you do things, you're going to make mistakes. Number two, you need to identify the problems and decide what are the priorities. And in a democracy, you need to get a buy-in, not just from the political parties sitting in parliament, not just in the parties that form the coalition that's governing, but you need to keep talking to the community and the people so that they buy into your program. And it's crucial that you do that. So I'm here to tell you, like I've mentioned the AIDS mistake, I'm here to tell you that once the system had developed on that race base. The entire system was pulling us back and continues to pull us back to the old system. And every time you want to change it, in a democracy, you find you have not got the resources and the capacity to change it. When I said to those people living in KwaMaslangu, I will give you land nearer to Pretoria so that you can live near your workplace, they said, we don't want it. Because they had now been used for 40 years living 150 kilometers away. They had got used to a family life where they had no responsibility for their children. Their children lived on their own throughout the day, and by the time mother and father returned from work, the children were fast asleep. And when Saturday weekends came for your rest day, the husband wanted to drink his beer, and the wife was too busy cleaning up the house and washing the clothes and ironing it to look after the children. But when we tried to undo this system, and we wanted to build clinics, the land was cheapest far away from the city. So we built the clinics where apartheid said we must build it. When we wanted to build the schools, we wanted to build it where the people live. But the people were living hundreds of kilometers away from their workplace. So all we were doing was reinforcing that geographical arrangement. And I recall us in cabinet, I served in the first cabinet. I recall us sitting down one day and I said, listen chaps, let's just look at what we are doing. We are very busy, we are building houses, we are providing electricity, we are providing water, we're building clinics, we're building schools. We're providing feeding for children at schools. But the pattern of life is remaining that each community is living in its ghetto. And if they physically live in their ghetto, they will be in mental ghettos also. Because you should know that the best way to foment hatred amongst people, whether it's based on differences of culture, of language, or of religion, is to make sure they don't know each other, so that they live in fear of each other, so that any rumor can light a fire. So that's the mental ghetto. The challenges of restructuring then are so big, the pressures pulling you back into the old system are so strong that sometimes you just want to say, I'll give it up, let me just go with the flow. You will face that problem in the world in which we live, and in the country in which you live, and in the region in which you live. Everything pulls you back to the old system. And so for you, you have to fight to move forward. I said we have done magnificent work. I think our democracy is stable. We've been through 4 elections. But now we have a new thing. People are saying to us that the dominance of the ANC means that there is a one-party democracy and therefore that is now unhealthy. I don't think that's the challenge. But you will have to find your own answers. I think the challenge is how to involve people so they are participants in the building of their lives. We had some demands, when I was in government, in the first government, that we should shape our budget with popular participation.